is Ramya. I'm a volunteer for Women Who Code organization and one of the contributors to this series. And I will be the moderator for today's session. For these slides and presentation, we can find on GitHub link here. Please make sure the chat is set to all panelists and attendees. And some housekeeping rules. Everyone will be muted throughout the webinar, and there will be opportunities for participation. Please share your thoughts on the chats and ask questions in Q&A. Entire team is here today. Please reach out to us with any technical questions. And this is session number 2 for Discover NLP with Python series. And thank you all to all our leaders and volunteers for this series. It would not have been possible without everyone's contributions. As I mentioned, I'm Ramya. I will be moderating today's session. Rishika will be covering the theoretical part today with this slide deck, and then Yashika will cover the implementation part using Google Colab. Our mission is to inspire women to excel in technology and careers, and our vision evolve where women are representative as technical executives, founders, VCs, board members, and software engineers. And our target engineers with 2 or more years of experience looking for support and resources to strengthen their influence and level up in their careers. And code of conduct. We are Women Who Code organization dedicated to providing empowering experience for everyone who participates in or supports our community, regardless of gender, gender identity, expression, sexual orientation, physical appearance, body size, age, religion. And our events are intended to inspire women to excel in technology careers, and anyone who is there for this purpose, please welcome. We do not tolerate harassments of members in any form. And you can read the report at this link, womenwhocode.com, Code of Conduct. And these are our 230,000 members, over 70 networks in 20 countries. And the numbers are growing, and members in 97 countries and more. 10,000 and more events and daily conferences, and $2 million scholarships. And we do have access to jobs and resources with many connections. And our movement, as the world changes, we can be connecting force that creates a sense of belongings while the world is being asked to isolate. And now I will hand it over to Rishika. Hi, Rishika.
Hi, thanks, Ramya. So let me just share my screen. Okay. All right, so hopefully everyone can see those slides clearly. Yeah, so as Ramya mentioned, today is the second session of our Discover NLP with Python series. Today we'll be focusing on the evolution of NLP as well as an introduction to deep learning and their different use cases in the real world. So the agenda for today is sort of a recap of week 1, then we'll do sort of a broad definition of what is deep learning. Then we'll go into neural networks and the various types of them, specifically convolutional neural networks, recurrent neural networks, and LSTMs. Then we'll touch on the history and the evolution of NLP and where we've reached to the different advancements in this field today. Then I'll give a little brief intro to word vectorization. The next session for the series will be going far deeper into word vectorization, but we just want to introduce this concept today, since we'll be using that in the demo on Google Colab, which will be led by Yashika. And then we'll return back to the slides and do a recap and wrap up. So for a recap of week 1, so this focused on the fundamentals of natural language processing and a high-level introduction. So an NLP is a subfield of computer science and artificial intelligence, and is concerned with interactions between computers and human or natural languages. And it is used to apply machine learning algorithms to text and speech. So it allows humans to bypass programming languages to speak to computers and instead uses normal human speech. So it basically breaks down the barriers of communication by allowing anyone, whether they have computing knowledge or not, to talk to bots, systems, apps, or any kind of software. So there's many different examples of applying NLP to create systems. You have speech recognition, machine translation, spam detection, autocomplete question answering, predictive typing, etc. And nowadays, majority of us have a device just in our pockets that uses one of these systems. For instance, Apple's Siri, Amazon's Alexa, or even the spam filter in your Gmail application. So as you recall, there are a variety of applications of NLP, as I mentioned, and here are just 3 of them. So first we have machine translation. This is the task of automatically converting one natural language into another. And in doing so, you're preserving the meaning of the input text and then producing fluent text in the output language. Next, we have text classification, which is a process of assigning tags or categories to text according to its content. So text classifiers can be used to organize, structure, and categorize pretty much anything. And text classification can be done in, sorry, just give me a second here. Okay, so text classification can be done in 2 different ways. You have manual and automatic. So manual is where an actual human annotator is interpreting the content of the text and then categorizes it accordingly. So this method does provide quality results, but it is very time consuming and expensive. And then automatic is where you actually go in and apply machine learning, natural language processing, and other techniques to automatically classify text in a faster and more cost-effective way. Lastly, we have sentiment analysis. This is a contextual mining of text, which helps to identify and extract the subjective information in any source material. And it is the most common text classification tool that analyzes an incoming message and tells whether the underlying sentiment is positive, negative, or neutral. And typically you split this up into 2 different stages. You have the training stage where the model is learning to associate a particular input to the corresponding output based on the different test samples that you have for training. And then in the prediction stage, the feature extractor is used to transform unseen text inputs into the feature vectors. And then these feature vectors are fed into the model, which then generates these predicted tags. And these tags, again, can be positive, negative, or neutral. And so for today's implementation, we will actually be executing a sentiment analysis task. And then just revisiting this workflow that we have for NLP. So last session, we discussed pre-processing and EDA, or exploratory data analysis. So pre-processing consists of the 6 major steps, which are listed here. We have noise cleaning, tokenization, spell checking, contraction mapping, stemming and lemmatization, and then stop word identification and removal. So these are kind of the 6 major steps you want to make sure to do anytime that you have any sort of raw text, whether that's in documents or just a text file or anything like that. And then we have EDA, or exploratory data analysis, and this is the process of exploring data, generating insights, testing hypotheses, checking assumptions, and helping to reveal any underlying hidden patterns in the data. And through all of these, you can get a basic description of the data, visualize it, identify any patterns in it, or identify potential challenges of using this data. So that's a recap of the first session. And so today we'll get into the first main subject, which is what is deep learning. So deep learning is also a subfield of machine learning, which is concerned with algorithms inspired by the structure and function of the brain, which are called artificial neural networks. So Andrew Ng from Coursera, and he's also a chief scientist at a research company, the chief scientists who formerly founded Google Brain, both of them came together that eventually resulted in the productization of deep learning technologies across a large number of Google services. So he has spoken and written a lot about what deep learning is and how it's a really good place to start. And the core of deep learning, according to Andrew Ng, is that we now have fast enough computers and enough data to actually train these large neural networks. So why deep learning? And not, why is it called deep learning and not artificial neural networks? So Geoffrey Hinton, who's actually a pioneer in the field of artificial neural networks, may have started the introduction of the phrasing deep to describe the development of these large artificial neural networks. And so it's a machine learning technique that helps to teach computers to do what comes naturally to humans. And this is learning by example. So it's a key technology behind driverless cars that helps to enable them to recognize a stop sign or to perhaps distinguish a pedestrian from a lamppost. It is a key to voice control in consumer devices like phones, tablets, TVs, and hands-free speakers. And it's getting a lot of attention lately, and for a good reason, because it's achieving results that were not possible before. So generally in deep learning, a computer model learns to perform classification tasks that are directly from images, text, or sound, and they can achieve state-of-the-art accuracy, sometimes even exceeding human-level performance. And these models are trained by using a large set of labeled data and neural network architectures that contain many layers. So the different use cases, first we have text analysis and extraction. So deep learning is, as I mentioned, a set of algorithms and techniques that use these artificial neural networks to then process the data, much as a human brain does. And so these algorithms use huge amounts of training data, sometimes millions of examples, to then generate semantically rich representations of text, which then can be fed into machine learning based models of different kinds that will make much more accurate predictions than just the traditional machine learning models. Next, we have speech and face recognition. So for speech recognition, at the most basic level, speech recognition converts sound waves to individual letters and ultimately sentences. And deep learning has finally made speech recognition accurate enough to be useful outside of carefully controlled environments. And then for face recognition, this is a problem of identifying and verifying people in a photograph by their face. So it is a task that is trivially performed by humans, even under varying light and when faces are changed by age or obstructed with accessories and facial hair. Nevertheless, it has remained a challenging computer vision problem for decades until recently. So deep learning methods are able to leverage these very large data sets of faces, and in doing so, they're able to learn these rich and compact representations of faces. And this allows these modern models to first perform as well and later to actually outperform the face recognition capabilities of humans. And so face recognition is this process that's comprised of detection, alignment, feature extraction, and it's essentially just a recognition task. And so deep learning models first approached and then exceeded human performance for these tasks, which is quite amazing. And then we have language translations. So this goes back to the task of machine translation. So it turns out that over the past 2 years, deep learning has totally rewritten our approach to machine translation. Deep learning researchers who know almost nothing about language translation are throwing together relatively simple machine learning solutions that are beating the best expert-built language translation systems in the entire world. And that actually the technology behind this breakthrough is called sequence-to-sequence learning, which is a bit more advanced, so I won't be going into that, but I just wanted to mention that. And lastly, we have chatbots. So a deep learning chatbot learns right from scratch through a process called deep learning. So in this process, the chatbot is created using machine learning algorithms. And so a chatbot learns everything from its data and from human to human dialogue. And so it's trained to develop its own consciousness on the text, and then you can teach it how to converse with people. Alternatively, you can also teach the chatbot through movie dialogue or play scripts. However, a human-to-human conversation is generally the preferred way to create the best possible deep learning chatbot. And remember, the more data you have, the better the effectiveness of the machine learning model will be. So from there, now that we've laid the ground for what is deep learning and the different use cases and why it is so popularly used, I will now introduce neural networks. So these are also called artificial neural networks, and they're essentially the workhorses of deep learning. And while they may look like black boxes, deep down, they're essentially accomplishing the same thing as any other model to make good predictions. So they are a widely adopted architecture for creating deep learning models and has its applications in NLP. So neural networks are multi-layer networks of neurons that we use to classify things, make predictions, etc. And so we have a set of inputs and then a set of target values. And we're trying to get predictions that match those target values as closely as possible. So a neural network is a series of algorithms that endeavors to recognize underlying relationships in a set of data through a process that mimics the way that the human brain operates. So in this sense, neural networks refer to systems of neurons, either organic or artificial in nature. And these networks can adapt to changing input. So the network is able to generate the best possible result without needing to redesign the criteria for the output. So here's a diagram of a simple neural network with 2 inputs, 1 output, and then 1 hidden layer of neurons. In the next slide, I'll give more details on what each of these layers are. And just remember that there's 3 types of neural networks that we'll be covering today, which are CNN, RNN, and LSTM. So this neural network is formed in 3 layers called the input layer, the hidden layer, and the output layer. So each layer can consist of 1 or more nodes, which is represented in this diagram by the circles. The arrows that connect the dots shows how all the neurons are actually interconnected. And in this way, data is traveling from the input layer all the way through to the output layer. The lines between the nodes indicate the flow of information from one node to the next. So in this particular type of neural network, the information flows only from the input to the output, that is from left to right. But they also have other types of neural networks that might have more intricate connections, such as feedback paths, which is essentially you have the flow of information going in multiple directions. The nodes of the input layer are passive, meaning that they don't actually modify the data in any way. So they receive a single value for their input and duplicate the value to their multiple outputs. In comparison, the nodes of the hidden layer and the output layers are actually active. And this means that they're actually modifying the data as is shown in this diagram. So each value from the input layer is duplicated and then sent to all of the hidden nodes. And so when this happens, this is called a fully interconnected structure. And so as shown in the figure, the values that are entering a hidden node are multiplied by certain weights. And these weights are a set of predetermined numbers that are stored in the program. So these are typically user-defined. And these weighted inputs are then added to produce a single number. And this is generally represented using the symbol sigma. And so before leaving the node, this number is passed through a nonlinear mathematical function called a sigmoid. And this is essentially an S-shaped curve that limits the output of the node that's on the receiving end. So that is that the input to the sigmoid is any value between negative infinity and positive infinity, while its output can only be between 0 and 1. And then from there, the outputs from the hidden layer are represented in this middle layer. And just as before, each of these values is duplicated and then applied to the next layer. So the active nodes of the output layer combine and modify the data to produce the 2 output values of this network, as shown in the third layer. So neural networks can have any number of layers and any number of nodes per layer. And most applications do use sort of this 3-layer structure with a maximum of a few hundred input nodes. And generally the hidden layer is about 10% the size of the input layer. So I know that was kind of a lot of information to sort of go through, but hopefully at a very high level, you can understand that we have generally these 3 layers, the input layer, the hidden layer, and the output layer. You can have any number of nodes inside, each of them at least 1. And then you essentially have the flow of information going from left to right. So the first type of neural network we'll be going over is a convolutional neural network. And so this is an algorithm which can take in any input, which is typically an image, and then assigns importance. And this importance is basically those weights that I was talking about. So it basically assigns these weights to various aspects or objects that are in the image. And this helps to then differentiate one image from the other. So the pre-processing that is required is much lower as compared to other classification algorithms. So while in very primitive methods, you had sort of these filters that were hand engineered, which is a very important part of this architecture. With enough training, convolutional neural networks actually have the ability to learn these filters or these characteristics a lot easier. So the architecture of a CNN is analogous to that of the connectivity pattern of neurons in the human brain, and it was actually inspired by how the visual cortex in your brain is organized. So individual neurons respond to stimuli only in a restricted region of the visual field, which is known as the receptive field. And then a collection of such fields actually overlap to cover the entire visual area. So as I mentioned, CNNs are a category of neural networks that have been proven to be very effective in areas such as image recognition and classification. And they've been successful in identifying faces, objects, and traffic signs, apart from powering vision in robots and even self-driving cars. They can be used in tons of applications, from as I mentioned, image and video recognition and classification, and even recommender systems to natural language processing and medical image analysis. So here I'm going a little bit deeper into how it works to recognize and classify images. So you can think of an image as a matrix of pixel values. So an image from a standard digital camera will have 3 channels. You have red, green, and blue. And you can imagine these as 3 2D matrices that are essentially stacked over each other. So you basically have one matrix for every color. And then each of these matrices essentially have the pixel values that are in the range from 0 to 255. And so CNNs derive their name from the convolution operator. So the primary purpose of convolution is to extract features from the input image. And this convolution preserves the spatial relationship between pixels by learning different features in the image. And it does this by using these small squares of input data. So image classification is this process of taking an input, like a picture, and then outputting a class, like a cat, or a probability that the input is a particular class. So, there's an 80% or a 90% probability that this input is indeed a cat. And a CNN has convolutional layers, it has ReLU layers, pooling layers, and a fully connected layer. I won't go too much into depth about what each of these are, but just remember that a CNN helps to convolve these learned features with the input data and then uses 2D convolutional layers. So this means that this type of network is ideal for processing 2-dimensional images. And compared to other image classification algorithms, as I mentioned, CNNs use very little pre-processing. So this means that they can actually learn those filters that have to be typically handmade in other algorithms. So as I mentioned, we have these different layers in a CNN. So you have the input layer and the output layer, and then in between you have the hidden layers. And these hidden layers usually consist of convolutional layers. And these convolutional layers also come along with ReLU layers, pooling layers, and the fully connected layer. So the convolutional layers apply a convolution operation to this initial input, which is just that image. And then this passes information on to the next layer. Then we have the pooling layer, which helps to combine the outputs of the different clusters of neurons into a single neuron in the next layer. And then the fully connected layer connects every neuron in one layer to every neuron in the next layer. And in a convolutional layer, neurons only receive input from a sub area of the previous layer. And in a fully connected layer, each neuron receives input from every element of the previous layer. So as you can see, there's sort of a different sending and receiving information between the convolutional layer and the fully connected layer. So just to reiterate, a CNN works by extracting features from images, and this eliminates the need for manual feature extractions. So in this case, the features were not trained. They were actually learned while the network is training on the set of images. And this actually makes deep learning models extremely accurate for all kinds of tasks, including computer vision. So CNNs learn feature detection through tens or hundreds of hidden layers, and then every layer that you have increases the complexity of the features that are being learned. And the next one we have are recurrent neural networks, or also known as RNNs. And these are another class of neural networks that allow previous outputs to be used as inputs while having hidden states. So they're mostly used in the field of natural language processing and speech recognition, including music generation, sentiment analysis, name entity recognition, and machine translation. So a very vanilla neural network takes in a fixed size vector as an input, and this actually limits its usage in situations that involve sort of a series type input with no predetermined size. But RNNs are actually designed to take a series of inputs with no predetermined limit on what size it is. So a single input item from the series is related to others and likely has an influence on its neighbors. So we actually need something that captures this relationship across inputs in a meaningful way. So while RNNs learn similarly while training, in addition, they actually remember things that are learned from the prior inputs while also generating the output. And so it's essentially, it's part of this entire network. So RNNs can take one or more input vectors and produce one or more output vectors. And the outputs are influenced not just by the weights that are applied on them by the inputs like any other neural network, but also by this hidden state vector. And this actually represents the context based on the prior input or output. So the same input can actually produce a different output depending on the previous inputs that are already in that series. And RNNs have been designed to work very well with sequence prediction problems, and they come in many forms and are best described by the types of inputs and the outputs that are supported. So we have different examples of sequence prediction problems. So we have one-to-many, many-to-one, many-to-many. These are basically distinguished between how many sort of steps you have between going from the input to the output. But if you focus on many-to-many, which is a sequence of multiple steps as the input that is then mapped to a sequence with multiple steps as your output, this problem is often referred to as sequence to sequence or seq to seq. And this is a very common model that is used in research and sort of in large production settings. So RNNs in general have received the most success when working with sequences of words and paragraphs, as I mentioned. And so this can include both sequences of text and sequences of spoken language, which is all represented as a time series. They're also used as generative models that require a sequence output not only with text, but on applications such as generating handwriting, etc. So RNNs are not appropriate for tabular data sets as you would see in a CSV file or a spreadsheet, and they're also not appropriate for image data input. And image data input is obviously a lot better suited for CNNs. And then moving from there, we have LSTMs, and this stands for long short-term memory. And this is perhaps the most successful RNN network because it actually helps to overcome the problems of training an RNN, and in turn has been used on a wide range of applications. So an LSTM is an RNN that is trained using backpropagation. So through time, and it's trained using backpropagation through time, and it does overcome the vanishing grading problem. So as such, it can be used to create these large recurrent networks that in turn can be used to address difficult sequence problems in machine learning and helps to achieve state-of-the-art results. So to speak a little bit on the vanishing gradient, so to recall, gradient descent algorithm is used to find the global minimum of the function so as to find the optimal setup for the network. So the information that travels back and forth in a neural network is used to calculate the error and then is propagated back in the network to then update the weights. This entire process is called backpropagation. So in RNN, a similar case happens, but with time, and thus it's called backpropagation through time. So the consecutive layers take input from previous layers in different time points. This means that each neuron is based on earlier neurons through time. Each neuron that participated in the calculation of the output which is associated with this cost function should then have its weight updated. In RNNs, the output layers constitute of all the neurons for back in time. So you're propagating all the way back, and this is a very challenging task. So the further you go through the network, the lower your gradient is, and it's actually harder to train the weights. So essentially the weights vanish as we propagate very far back to the earlier neurons and the earlier layers. So just to make it clear, so instead of neurons, these LSTM networks actually have these memory blocks that are connected into layers. So this block has components that make it smarter than just a classical neuron and a memory for recent sequences. So a block can contain these different gates that actually manage the block's state and its output. And a unit operates upon an input sequence, and each gate within a unit actually uses a sigmoid activation function to then control whether they are triggered or not. And this then makes the state to change, and then you actually have an addition of information flowing through that unit. And so going back to those gates, we have three different kinds of gates within a memory unit. So first you have a forget gate, which actually conditionally decides what information to discard from the unit. Then you have an input gate, which conditionally decides which values from the input to then update the memory state. And then the output gate, which conditionally decides what to output based on an input and the memory of the unit. And you can think of every unit kind of like a mini state machine where the gates of the unit have different weights that are learned through the entire training procedure. And so LSTMs can solve numerous tasks that were not solvable by previous learning algorithms that were used by recurrent neural networks. And since they are so effective at capturing long-term temporal dependencies without suffering from the optimization hurdles that plagued these simple RNNs, they've actually been used to advance state-of-the-art for many difficult problems. And this includes handwriting recognition and generation, language modeling and translation, acoustic modeling of speech, speech synthesis, even protein secondary structure prediction, analysis of audio and video data, amongst many others. All right, so now we're going to jump into the evolution of NLP and just looking at the neural history. So as you see from 2001 to 2018, there's been quite an advancement in the field. So in 2001, we had neural language models. Then in 2013, we saw word embeddings. Then in 2013, also, we saw neural networks for NLP. Then seek-to-seek models were developed in 2014. And then attention was added in 2015. And then starting from 2018, we had pre-trained language models. So this model here that we have, the Hodgkin-Huxley model, is a mathematical model that describes how action potentials in neurons are initiated and then propagated. So it is a set of nonlinear differential equations that actually helps to approximate the electrical characteristics of cells that are excitable, such as neurons and myocytes in the heart. So it is this continuous time dynamical system. And this was described by Alan Hodgkin and Andrew Huxley back in 1952. And they helped to explain the ionic mechanisms that were underlying the initiation and the propagation of action potentials in a specific axon in the squid. And so in session one, I already sort of discussed the history and sort of the evolution of NLP, but just to reiterate that the techniques in NLP have evolved over the past decade as the amount of data has evolved as well. And so what I would like to direct our focus to in terms of NLP's evolution is the various models that have been developed over the years. So here's a list of some of the most popular ones and how they have evolved in terms of improving in accuracy and performance, as well as a wider range of applications and solving increasingly complex text-based problems. So hidden Markov models, or HMMs, they are a class of probabilistic graphical models that allows us to predict a sequence of unknown or hidden variables from a set of observed variables. So a very simple example of this is predicting the weather based on the type of clothes that someone is wearing. And so the reason it's called a hidden Markov model is because we're constructing an inference model based on the assumptions of a Markov process. And the Markov process assumption is simply that the future is independent of the past given the present. In other words, assuming we know our present state, we do not need to know any other historical information to predict the future state. So a simple application of this to NLP is parts of speech tagging for a simple sentence. So the sequence of words in the sentence are the observations, and then the parts of speech are these hidden states. And so given a sentence, we are essentially looking to predict the corresponding parts of speech tags. Then we have Word2Vec, which was the first big advancement that came in 2013. And this was detailed in a paper by Mikolov and his peers. And they realized that as they trained neural networks on an NLP task, the network was forced to learn the similarities between words. So these vector representations of words were then stored in the embedding layer of the neural network. And their discovery has added an entirely new dimension to NLP tasks. And so thanks to Word2Vec, we now have a more efficient way to create word vectors. And we no longer have to rely on the traditional sparse representation of words with one-hot encoding. And also using word embeddings helps to require less memory, it decreases compute time, and also has been shown to drastically improve downstream model performance. And then we had RNNs and LSTMs in 2014 and 2015, respectively. And this was thanks to advances in deep learning and increasing computational capabilities. So both of these help to enable the processing of textual sequence data. And the order of the data matters with sequence data, and there was no good way to handle sequence data before RNNs. And then LSTMs helped to improve on RNNs in that for long sequences, the network was able to remember the earlier sequence inputs. And then around 2015 to 2016, attention-based networks became popular. And so attention networks are a type of neural network that allow for the focus on a specific subset of the data input. So you can essentially specify what you want the network to pay attention to. And so these models have been breaking performance records on many NLP tasks like neural machine translation, language modeling, and question answering problems. So attention networks are also more efficient and require fewer computational resources. And this is a very important improvement as it typically requires significant computing power in the form of a GPU, which is not always accessible to train RNNs. And then a specific type of attention-based network was introduced in 2017, and this is a transformer model. And this has been especially dominant in modern NLP architecture. So the transformer is similar to RNNs in that it handles sequence data, but the data doesn't need to be inputted into the model in any particular order. So because of this, the transformer model can actually train faster and with much more data using this parallelization. And so the transformer model led to our current state in NLP, which is the era of BERT, ERNIE 2.0, and XLNet. So BERT stands for bidirectional encoder representations from transformers. And that's quite a mouthful, but essentially these were introduced in 2018 by Google researchers. And versions of BERT are one of the more advanced NLP models that are available. So it is a deeply bidirectional unsupervised model, which is used for pre-training word representations that could be used later in any NLP task. And this bidirectionality that I mentioned is crucial in neural network because this allows information to flow forward and backward as a model is training, and this actually results in better model performance. And then we have ULM fit, and this is an effective transfer learning method that can be applied to any task in NLP, and it actually introduces techniques that are key for fine-tuning a language model. This method actually significantly outperformed the state of the art on 6 different text classification tasks and actually reduced the error by anywhere between 18 to 24% on the majority of data sets that they were tested on. Furthermore, with only 100 labeled examples, it actually matched the performance of training from scratch on 100 times more data. And then we have BERT, and BERT was actually just the tip of the iceberg for attention-based architectures. So in 2019, researchers at Carnegie Mellon and Google came together and created XLNet. And so the paper claims that XLNet actually outperformed BERT on 20 different tasks, often by a large margin. And unlike other recent advancements in NLP, the architecture is not drastically different. And just like BERT, XLNet also utilizes an attention-based network. And then in the summer of 2019, a Chinese technology company published a paper on another attention-based network called ERNIE 2.0. And so this paper claims that it outperforms BERT and XLNet on 16 different tasks, including Chinese language tasks. And just like BERT, ERNIE 2.0 and XLNet are both pre-training models, that make use of transformer architectures and, more importantly, attention mechanisms. And so while the original BERT model is no longer the reigning champion of NLP, versions of BERT, such as Roberta, actually do remain competitive in the technology space today. All right, and so I said I was going to sort of briefly go into word vectorization. So since we'll be using this for our implementation with Google Colab, but this is going to be the focus of our next session. So I'm just going to sort of touch on this in a very high level manner. So since the beginning of the brief history of NLP, there's been this need to transform text into something that a machine can actually understand. And this is essentially transforming text into a meaningful vector or array of numbers. And so sort of the de facto standard way of doing this in the pre-deep learning era was actually just to use a bag of words approach. And so as I mentioned, we're going to discuss the details of different word vectorization methods in the next session, but I wanted to introduce this concept here since it is a very important component of any NLP task. So a vector space model is simply a mathematical model that represents unstructured text or any other data as these numeric vectors, such that each dimension of the vector is a specific feature or attribute. So word vectorization refers to a general set of techniques that aims to extract information from any corpus of text and then associates each one of its words to a vector. For example, we could associate the vector 1, 4, -3, and 2 to the word king. And so this value is computed thanks to an algorithm that actually takes into account the context of the word. And then by feeding the word vectorization algorithm to a very large corpus, we will actually obtain a vector mapping in which very close values imply that the words appear in the same context and more generally have some kind of similarity, whether it be syntactic similarity or semantic similarity. And so processing natural language text and extracting useful information from the given word. Let me see. So the amount of textual data that you can have can be very massive. And so the problem with textual data is that it needs to be represented in a format that can be mathematically used in solving some problem that you have. And so in simple words, we need word vectorizations because we need to get an integer representation of a word. And this is required specifically for deep learning models to be performed on any kind of input, which is not in numerical format. So for NLP and deep learning, every word needs to be converted into a semantically meaningful vector, which works in two ways. And so it becomes compatible with deep learning models and also helps in giving semantic attributes to the predictions. So word vectorization can also be called word embeddings, and it can help in many different use cases, including computing similar words, text classification, document clustering or grouping, feature extraction for text classifications, and generally in most natural language processing tasks. So that covers everything for the sort of the theoretical portion today. And before we jump to the implementation with Google Colab, I just wanted to see if there were any questions. Let me just pull up the chat. Let me just stop sharing so I can check the chat. All right, I don't see anything in the Q&A. So I think I'll pass it over to Yashika now to jump into the notebook.
Thank you so much, Rishika, for the presentation. It was amazing. I can see one question in Q&A. So maybe you can take that over.
Okay, so the question is, what do you recommend for sentiment analysis? So we'll actually be doing sentiment analysis in our Colab notebook. So it's a perfect timing for that question. So hopefully we can answer that through the coding.
I'll start sharing my screen just a second. Okay, I assume everyone can see my screen. So last time during the collab session, we performed exploratory data analysis and we saw what are the different techniques to actually see how the data is structured, what are the underlying features, what are the combinations, what are the relationship between the different columns. And we are going to take that forward in this session as well, but we would combine that along with the modeling part so that we can show you how that can be used along with the modeling. So you can actually perform some classification text. And for this, we have chosen sentiment analysis. So this is a really basic project to get you started with NLP. So we are just taking forward all of the things that we have learned in theory so far. So we are just going to take that forward. Talking about the data set, we chose the US airline sentiment data set that is available on Kaggle. So this is the data set. It's available on Kaggle. And this data set basically contains the sentiments of people regarding the US airlines. So all the tweets that has been posted on Twitter by the travelers for 6 different US airlines has been scraped and put in this data set. And our task is to analyze those reviews and classify them as positive, negative, or neutral. So basically we want to see that are the reviews negative, are the reviews positive, or are they just neutral? And apart from that, during the EDA, that is exploratory data analysis, we would also check that what are the negative reasons and what are the reasons behind negative reviews that a particular airline is getting. So for getting the data set, there are two different possibilities. So first of all, if you want to follow this notebook along, you can take the link that is available on the presentation as well as posted in the chat, and then you can go to the collab website, that is this collab website, and then you can just paste that link over here under the GitHub tab, and then when you'll tap the search button, this would show you these two links, and then you have to just tap on this discover NLP Python 2.ipynb notebook. Then this would open this similar collab notebook in your local machine. So I hope everyone is able to follow that along. I'll wait for a minute for everyone to catch up. If anyone is facing any difficulties or need any help setting up that, please drop that in the chat. All right, I'll move forward then. So yeah, that was the basic overview of the data set and the task that we are aiming for. Uh, you can find the data set from this link on Kaggle, and then we are going to import the necessary libraries. So as discussed last time, we would need NumPy for basic array manipulation. So we are importing NumPy as NP so that we don't have to write NumPy again and again, and we can just use NP to call NumPy. So this is just the abbreviation. And similarly, we can import pandas as PD. Pandas is just used for reading the CSV file that we are going to get from this data set. So pandas is for reading that and preparing data frames. sklearn or scikit-learn is for modeling, that would come in the end. Then we have these two libraries that are matplotlib and seaborn, and these two libraries are for plotting the graphs and for the visualization to check how the data is, how the data distribution is. I've done this pip install Kaggle to make sure that I'm able to extract the dataset from Kaggle. So it's totally optional because Colab already has Kaggle installed, but I have done this just for the safe side. Then talking about getting the dataset, there are two different ways of doing that. The first way is to just go to the link that is posted in the presentation. Then you can just go to the data, and here you would see the option of download. So you can download the dataset from here and then upload that to your Google Drive, and then you would have to mount your Google Drive from here, from the options from here, and then you would be able to access that. For now, I have done that in an easier way. So I have taken the dataset directly from Kaggle to my Collab notebook without downloading that on my machine and then uploading that to the drive. So for that, I have used this command. So from google.colab import files. So this would ask me to upload the JSON file, and the JSON file is the API that you would get from here. So when you would create your account on Kaggle, you can go from here to my account, and then you can ask to generate a new API key. So here you would get the option of generating a new API key. So just tap on create new API token, and then it would download a new Kaggle JSON file for you. So this is something that you need for this task. So I'm not doing that because I've already done that. And once you do that, you have to run this cell. It would ask you to upload that JSON file that you just downloaded, and you can upload that from there. Then this cell is for preparing the API. So you already downloaded the API. Now this would let you access that data. This is just to check the version of Kaggle. So this is also optional, not necessary to do it here. And then finally, using the Kaggle command, you can download the dataset. So this is the command for downloading any dataset on Kaggle. And then this is the link to the dataset. So as you can see, there was the dataset Crowdflower Twitter airline sentiment. So this is the link that you would copy from here, and you would just put that with your command Kaggle datasets download. So this would download the dataset for you, and that Okay, I actually have to upload the JSON file. Just a second. This happened because I generated a new API and that expired my old API, so I have to do that again. And after that, I would run these cells. This would show me the version unauthorized. So maybe there is some error with the API. I have to actually get that expire and generate a new one again. I I think that this is the problem with Kaggle, because each time you create a new API token, that means that your original API token has been expired. So that means you have to generate a new one again. What I can do is I can factory reset my runtime so that it makes sure that right API is being uploaded this time. So I'll tap reconnect from here. So these are the common things that happen whenever you work on a data science project. So it's good to learn along the way. Again, installing and importing the library, again, uploading your JSON file. Yeah. All right. Hopefully this would work now. Okay, so this is happening because this is expecting Kaggle here, and I have Kaggle 2 because it's downloaded twice. So it has the name Kaggle 2. So I would just need to do that here. This is weird. All right. So this would just happen here because the name is changed now. Let's see. Maybe I'll stop sharing screen again and put the API manually. I'm so sorry for this. Just a second. Okay, so it bugged. I just had to rename that to Kaggle because it was renamed to Kaggle 2 because it was downloaded twice and it was not accepting the brackets. So this is something you have to take care in future. Then it would show the right version and then we can download the dataset. So next time, whenever you get 401 unauthorized, you have to make sure that you have the right API and you're doing the downloading stuff rightly. So you can see the downloaded data set from here. So here is the zip file that is downloaded, and you actually need to unzip this before using the CSV file. So for that we use unzip command and then just run this cell. This would unzip that file, refresh and see that CSV would appear. So this is the CSV file that we are going to use. So using pandas for reading that CSV file, and then we'll check the shape of the data. So for that, we would use data.shape attribute, and that would tell that we have this much of rows and we have 15 columns. So we have these much of columns, but we do not need all of them. We are just concerned about the text because we are doing sentiment analysis, and that means that we want to analyze the text and want to see what is the underlying sentiment of the text is. So these other columns are not of our use for now, but for other data science cases or projects, these might be of uh, your help. So you have to check that in that case. But for now, we are just concerned with the text. We are just concerned with the text and the regarding sentiment. So here are the sentiments like neutral, positive, or negative. We'll see that now. So data.describe would just tell us for a border data, like what are the count, mean, standard deviation, and minimum, maximum values are. So these are the part of exploratory data analysis. These are necessary to see how your data is, and this is generally done before any pre-processing or modeling part. Then we are going to check if we have any null values, and for that we are going to use isNA.sum, and we can see that we do not have any null values in the text column, but we do have a lot of null values in other columns. That is another reason for neglecting these columns, because a lot of null values are present there. So imputing those values or adding some values in place of the missing rows would not help. So we are just going to drop that. Now we are just going to see how sentiments are distributed. So for that, I am picking the airline sentiment column from the pandas data frame, that is from here. So I'm picking this column, and I want to see what are the values per sentiment is. So we can see that most of the sentiments are negative, then there are neutral, and the least sentiments are for positive. So this is the distribution for each of the sentiments. Now we are curious that why the airlines are getting the negative sentiments. So for that, we are going to inspect that further. So before that, we are going to see what are the distributions of airlines. So you can see that most of the tweets are regarding the United Airlines, but is it positive or is it negative or is it neutral? We have to check that. So even if United is getting a lot more tweets than Virgin America or other airlines, we have to see are they really positive or negative. So let's see sentiments per airline. So for that, we are using the crosstab function of pandas, in which we are going to give it two columns. So first is the airline, the second is the airline sentiment. So this would just plot the bar graph regarding these two columns. So you can see that here. So for American, as you can see, we have most of the negative uh, tweets and sentiments more than the positive and neutral, and similarly for United. So here you can conclude that United had the most tweets, most sentiments, but the reason is negative. So they are getting tweets, but most of them are negative, so it's not a good thing for them. Now we are going to see the same thing in a different manner. So earlier we used the crosstab thing, we are going to now use group by thing. So these two things would do the similar thing. Then we are going to see the positive sentiments. So airline sentiment is equal to positive. So this would show the distribution of positive sentiments per airline. So Southwest got the most positive sentiments. That means Southwest was really good with support and everything. So the customers were really happy with Southwest, and uh, Virgin America got the least positive sentiments. Similarly, for the negative sentiments, you can see that we have most of the negative sentiments regarding United Airlines, and we also had the most tweets for United Airlines. Same case for neutral. In this case, Delta has the most neutral sentiments. So clearly, people are unhappy with United. Most negative tweets are found for United. So these are the steps for concluding the results. So you cannot just look at the columns and raw data and say, okay, this airline is performing better or that airline is performing better. You have to go through the exploratory data analysis process to actually find the reasons behind that, and this is what you need to do. Then we are doing that further. So just a little bit more of exploratory data analysis to see uh, how the reasons are spreaded for the particular airline. So as you can see, for American, the most negative reason was the customer service issue. So they are really bad at customer service issue. That was the most dominant reason here. And for US Airways, the same issue arises here. So these are the distribution of negative reasons for the negative sentiments for each airlines. American is guilty of the worst customer service issue, and that is also a reason why they got the most negative sentiments. Then we are plotting the heat map here. So basically, heat map is to see the correlation between columns or features. So this is something a bit advanced, so we don't need that here in our task right now, but this is something you actually have to take care of in your data science projects. So always plot the heat map to see how the features are correlated with each other. So finally, that ends the exploratory data analysis part, and now we are going to jump on pre-processing. So quickly, we are taking the text and the airline sentiment column, because these are the only two things we are concerned about, because we are dropping the other columns. So since the data was collected from Twitter, it is obvious that it must include some links, mentions, punctuation marks, and stop words that we discussed in the last session, that the stop words are the words that are not necessary and do not add much to the information. So we are going to drop that. So for that, we have a little function here called pre-process. We have imported all the necessary libraries. So NLTK is the most used text pre-processing library. We are downloading the stop words so that we could find and remove that from our text. Similarly, we are using the word tokenize to divide the sentences of text in words so that it could be easier to process. Then regex to remove the punctuation and the unwanted links and hashtags. And then we are using snowball stemmer here. So remember, we discussed stemming and lemmatization are the two things that we use to bring the word back to their root form. So snowball stemmer is a type of stemmer that is used for stemming. So we are going to use that here. So these are the basic Python thing we are doing here. So substituting the not necessary things with the space here. Similarly for the hashtag, HTTPS, and anything else. Uh, so we are just keeping the alphabets here, and we are disregarding the hashtag, alphabets, punctuations, digits, and unwanted things that are present in the text because it was script from the Twitter. So we are also lowering the case because we want to regard each word as as if they are in the similar case. So we don't want two words treated being differently just because the case is different. So that's why we are turning that into lowercase. Ultimately, when all of these steps are performed, we are going to join those because before processing, we divided the words into tokens for processing, and now we can join that back. When we apply this whole thing on our text column, we would see that we do not have any punctuations or at the rates. So this would take some time because apply is a slow function, and then we could see that we do not have any mentions or at the rates uh, or links. Then we are going to plot the word cloud. So word cloud is basically a picture that shows what are the prominent words present in your text. So it tells you, or it gives you the basic idea of what are the most used words that are present in your text. So for that, we are going to import word cloud from word cloud. So this is the basic function for that. And we can see that we have flight, think, cancel, JetBlue, United. These are the, so the bigger the word appears, the most used it is in the text, and the smaller the word is, the less used it is in the text. So you can see the small words like pay, nothing, these are less significant words. Then finally we come to the modeling part. So as Rishika mentioned, we are using word vectorization for this because machines cannot understand text. They need a numerical form as an input. So we have to convert the text into a numerical form so that it's easier for the machine to interpret. But that comes under word vectorization, and that is something we are going to cover in the next session. So I am just showing the process here, but to get more information or get more deep for that, we are going to do that in the next session. So scikit-learn library is scikit-learn library has the TF-IDF vectorizer that does the same thing that we want our vectorizer to do. So that would transform the text into numerical form. So all the words that you just saw, flight, airways, etc., would be converted into a numerical form, and that would be actually fed into our model. So not going in too much details because this would be covered in the next session. Then label encoder, of course. So this label encoder is going to encode the sentiments. So text is not a single word, right? We have text that are the reviews, and they are like 100 or 120 characters long, or even more longer text we have. So for that, we would need a transformer, or we would need a vectorizer to actually vectorize the whole text and present that into a numerical form. But in case of the sentiments, we only have one word, so like only positive, negative, or neutral. So when we only have one word, then we can actually use label encoder, because label encoder can encode the categories. So we have categories there. So label encoder would give airline sentiments 0, 1, or 2. So like negative would be given 0, positive would be given 1, and neutral would be given 2. So this is what happens behind the scenes. Then we are going to use train test split to split the data set, because we want to check the performance of our data set. So we cannot do on the same data set that we are using for training. So we are going to split that into two halves. So I'm taking 0.25, that is 25% of the data set for testing, and the 75% of data set is for training. I am using the SVC, that is support vector classifier model here, but you can use anything, like you can use random forest or any other model that you would like to use, but I'm using SVC here. So just importing SVC, declaring that here, and then fitting that on our text classifier. So it's taking time to learn the pattern. This would take some time because the model is actually training on the data that we provided it. There is also SVR, that is for regression. Our task is classification, so that's why we are using SVC here. So it's trained now, we can do the predictions. So we can use the same text classifier to predict on the text on the test set that we held out before, the 25% of that. So this is going to predict on that part. In the next cell, I'm going to compare the two values. So X test is actually what we had in reality, and predicted is what our model has predicted. So we would compare that how well our model has generalized the idea. So we can see that the model has done good job till 3 index, and then on the 4th index our model has predicting a wrong value. So actually it was a negative sentiment, but we predicted positive. So here's a little mismatch, that is a little drop in the accuracy here, but that's fine. The more data we fed into the model, the better the accuracy will be. Then we would just see that in the numbers, that how well the model performs. So for that, we are importing some classification report, confusion metrics, and accuracy score from scikit-learn, and this tells us that how well our model has performed. So apart from these values, we can also see the accuracy score, that is 79 point something. So our model has performed with an accuracy of 79%. So in 79% of the cases, our model was correct in classifying the sentiments. And this could definitely be improved further with the better data set. Like we can give the model more data, and then it would perform better. And we can also use language models like BERT and Unfit, that we would be discussing in future sessions as discussed by Rishika. So that would definitely improve the accuracy. These are the references for you to actually check out for completing the collab notebook. So that's all from my side. If you have any question, please feel free to drop that in chat, and I'll hand over to Rishika for the closing note.
All right, thanks, Yashika. Let me just share my screen. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that. All right, so just for some recap and next steps, So just a quick recap. In today's session, we learned about what is deep learning, the theory behind it, the various use cases. Then we went on to neural networks, the different types. So we had CNN, RNN, and LSTM, and then also the different use cases and when each of these different architectures are useful depending on the input that you have. Then we sort of talked about how to leverage neural network architecture to solve different NLP-based problems, and then also the importance of vectorization for NLP tasks. And just to bring us back to this workflow that we have, so what's really important, as you can see, that after we go through pre-processing and feature engineering, and then going into our modeling and the evaluation of the model, typically we actually sort of go back to the cycle and actually help to improve the model. So this is something that is a very iterative process, and it is really important in order to ensure that you're getting, you know, the state of the art, the best possible accuracy for your given task. And then here we have some resources and further reading listed. So just a little bit more information about RNN and LSTM. You can read a bit further on NLP. We also have an article on the history and evolution of NLP, as well as how to use Python and NLTK, specifically for removing stop words. So that sort of finishes our content for today's session. The next session will be the last Sunday of November. So that's going to be November 29th from 8 to 9:30 in Eastern Standard Time. And this will be focusing on NLP and word vectorization. And then for some upcoming events that we have for the track. So on the 30th, we have our AMA with Megan, who's a data scientist at Microsoft, October 30th. And then on November 4th, we have session 6 for the beginner Python study group, which is going to be an open Q&A and review session. And then on November 12th, we'll be having an introduction to autonomous vehicles. And then again, one more session for the beginner Python study group, and then another session in the AMA series on November 27th. And please stay connected with us. We are on social media. So there's our Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn, as well as our website linked below, where you can view all these upcoming events, as well as register for them. So that concludes everything we had prepared for today's session. If anyone has any questions, please drop that in the Q&A box. And please make sure to join our Slack workspace for Women Who Code Python, as well as the channel that we have dedicated to the series, which is Discover NLP with Python. And thank you everyone for joining today. I hope you all enjoyed today's session. I see a question in the Q&A about getting access to the recording. So you can access that on the Women Who Code YouTube channel. And so then basically when you visit that channel, a few days after the session, typically the recording is uploaded. So currently our recording for session 1 can be found on our YouTube channel. And then a few days after, once we've finished today's session, the recording for session 2 will be uploaded as well. And let me see if there's any other questions. And then I see a question about the ML libraries like PyTorch, TensorFlow, if they have the newer models like BERT, UL, Malafit, XLNet. So I believe you do have to do some extra like installation and importing of them, but I believe you can, sort of directly have them in your notebook or whatever you're using with PyTorch or TensorFlow. So I think you would be able to directly use those newer models that were mentioned. Okay, I don't see any more questions and nothing else in the chat. So I think we will, yeah, thanks Ramya. So Ramya just put the link to our session 1 recording. And that is, again, on our YouTube channel for Women Who Code. And I think that's it for today's session. Thank you everyone for joining. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, afternoon, evening. And I hope to see you for our 3rd session.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.